What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with another podcast, What's Going On in Pop Culture Right Now. We got a good one this week, bunch of movies, Pixar's Elio, Danny Boyle and Alex Garland's 28 years later, almost 20 years since that franchise last gave us a film, and of course, an early look from me at Joseph Kosinski's F1 the movie starring Brad Pitt. Very exciting indeed. And we also have new music from HAIM and Aitch. So make sure you subscribe, youtube.com/nostalgiapod. linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Get the best of 2025 Spotify playlist linked below. Let me know it's good, and let's get into it. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of HAIM's fourth album, I Quit. HAIM, the three-piece sister rock band, pop rock band, their first album since 2021. Of course, HAIM, though, has been, kind of in the mix since then, around then. Of course, Alana HAIM, the youngest HAIM sister, a great starring role in Paul Thomas Anderson's Licorice Pizza. She will be acting again in PTA's One Battle After Another later this summer. HAIM had the big feature on Taylor Swift's Evermore song, Nobody No Crime, which became a big hit. They've remained around, even though I think musically as a group, it's certainly been quiet since that last album. And this new album is a departure creatively from the band's previous three records because no longer is a chief producer and creative force behind the album present. Of course, Danielle HAIM has split from her relationship with producer Ariel Rechtsted, and he had a big influence and role in the previous records. So now the thematic material regarding I Quit is actually about that relationship, and he is no longer contributing to the album. Makes some sense, but a kind of fun meta approach to thinking about the album. And in his place, actually, Rostam was heavily involved on the production side of things with this album, which is pretty cool. HAIM's fourth album, I Quit, is a great success for taking a lot of their sounds forward as a group. This is certainly the most diverse sounding album they've ever made. There's a lot of variety here. There's a lot of production choices. Now, does that make for a bit of a scattershot album that's maybe a bit too long? Could have been a little bit more focused in terms of how it sounded? Perhaps, but I think a lot of the songs, particularly those in the beginning and end of the track list, are really good. The shining achievement, though, of this new HAIM era is clearly the lead single, Relationships, which is the most melodic song they've ever made, the catchiest song they've ever made, and to me, the best song they've ever made. I just really love the track. I mean, I found myself going back to it a lot. I think it has just enough sparseness to its production, but moves at such a great clip. I mean, the core hook, the chorus of the song, I think is awesome. I think it's a great, like light pop rock song, one of my favorite songs of the year. Elsewhere on the album, though, I think there's a lot of stuff that grabs your attention. And again, I think that the sonic variety of this album makes it interesting to listen to. And I found this probably the most engaging of all the HAIM albums. And now I'm not a massive HAIM fan. I'll be curious if people who are more into the group historically, how they feel about this album. But to me, it really held my attention. I enjoyed the song Gone quite a bit. It has this acoustic start with some choir. Then the drums kick in and the guitar gets electric. It has this big outro with like even more layered percussion. Noticeable Freedom 90 George Michael sample at its core. That's a song that really moves and progresses throughout its runtime and is kind of epic, honestly. Really liked it. All Over Me, the second track also, I liked. Great groove, kind of more of like a headbanger as far as HAIM tracks go. I think those chords, really grab you and goes even harder at the end. I quite like that one. Down to Be Wrong, I think those snares grab you right away. Acoustic guitar line, maybe a bit less energetic, after All Over Me and Gone. Following Relationships, we have Down to Be Wrong. Take Me Back, I thought that quick strumming was really nice. Bit of like a different affectation vocally. The horn outro, those saxophones, really nice. I think Love You Right is just okay. The Farm, a bit of a slow burner. This is where I think the album gets a little slow, just doesn't quite grab you as much, this middle section here. Lucky Stars, the guitar shows back up at least. Million Years, you have these more electronic drums than you'd heard to that point, just standing out for being a bit of a different sound. Everybody's trying to figure me out, though. This is a highlight, kind of brings you back, just like the song's like a total jam. And then Trying to Feel My Pain right after that. Very groovy. Love those keys. Spinning, another groovy one. I think the rhythm between Trying to Feel My Pain and Spinning is great. Cry, I think the drums hit very hard. I love the bass on that. SD really jamming clearly. Blood on the Street, I think the songwriting on this song really stands out. HAIM, I think generally you think of them as a songwriting forward group. And if there's anything that like holds me back from greater HAIM appreciation, it's probably vocals. I think they're more of like a instrumentation and writing forward group, and then vocally, Danielle and the rest of them are good, but like they don't like knock your socks off necessarily, so they have to really grab you with that writing and then the conception of the production the way they often do. And then the last track, Now It's Time, I think that bass, it was very unique in the way it almost like screeched, the way you heard it, and I quite enjoyed it. So yeah, HAIM, I quit. I like the album. I thought it was impressive and took a lot of chances, and I think with a little more focus, not on necessarily even the sound being focused, but just trimming the fat a little bit on this album. I think could have been a hair better, but I did quite like it. And again, Relationships looking very likely to make my top 10 songs of 2025. Let me know though, what'd you think of HAIM's fourth album, I Quit? What was your favorite song? And for more music reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of Aitch's third album, 4. Bit of a confusing title, using 4 for the third album, but it's of course a Manchester reference. Aitch, famously a northern British rapper. I'd say the most significant one we have right now. Of course, everyone else we associate with London for the most part. And this is Aitch's first album since 2022, and it's been a bit of a quieter stretch for him in terms of solo music, but there's been some features, here and there. I think most notably, things kind of popped up with a seemingly brief beef with Central C, his fellow English rapper. Aitch putting out A Guy Called diss track in response to Central C making remarks regarding losing an award to Aitch and kind of disparaging him in the process. Either way, that beef seems to kind of come and go, and at this point, I think people who enjoy Aitch, I think we're certainly looking forward to this. He's become a very big artist in the UK and has, I think, demonstrated a lane for himself lately, being interested in sampling and more, crossover type songs than just the traditional, hard rapping style of things. But of course, he is still very much about the bars as well. So, kind of making a name for himself. And I don't think there's been much of an impression here in the States from Aitch all that much. Of course, we know Central C has blasted open the door when it comes to that for UK rap. We'll see if anyone can follow in his footsteps. Of course, I recently reviewed the AJ Tracey album, a close collaborator of Aitch. We'll see if Aitch, or AJ for that matter, can follow suit to some regard in the States. I would certainly root for it. Aitch's third album, 4, is another solid effort from the Manchester rapper. I don't know if anything on this necessarily grabbed me to the degree that the greatest songs he's made to this point have, such as Rain. However, he has some great features on this, but he's certainly still about his core ethos, which appears to be rapping hard and rapping about the pleasures of life in amusing ways. So if you're an Aitch fan, 4 is what you've been looking for. I just don't know if this necessarily takes Aitch to the next level or anything. First song, Clock the Game, I like that beat drop, the way it switches up. I think the chorus, though, just okay with that bass drum, but Aitch does give you a second flow halfway through the song, again, getting it right out in Front Street, what kind of rapper he is right away. I think Bounce has a fun beat, kind of like this electronic horn loop. I think the sex raps on this are a bit cringy. That's something he raps about a lot. I don't know if they necessarily work on this one. Coal for Body featuring Tiggs to Author. I thought this one was interesting because it's more of like a dance track with like this bass rhythm. I think it's all right. Till for Late, you have the feature from Poser, which I think his deep voice is amazing contrast with Aitch. I love that back and forth, with that bass underneath. And, you compare that to the next track, Test, featuring AJ Tracey, of course. And again, like that contrast really stands out. And there's a common theme on this album, a handful of the features where Aitch is really good at trading bars with guests. And I think because he has that Manchester accent, it really, it stands out versus, someone from West London or whatever. And I really enjoy Test with AJ. If you think about the H feature on the AJ album that we just got, also featuring Heady One, that was, kind of like a more of a mid-tempo track, but Test is just a hard banger. I mean, you have AJ with his typical super tight flow. The beat is very tough. I love the way the flair of those keys as well. They go back and forth several times, and super cool. I mean, it feels like a one for me, one for him type thing with H and AJ on each other's albums in consecutive weeks. Pretty cool. Obviously, they're both as big as they are in large part due to the success of Rain, which is an iconic UK rap song at this point. One of the probably the best rap songs or UK rap songs of the last 10 years, right? Certainly one of the most popular ones. And I think Test is, worthy of that lineage and is really awesome. M40, you have a very noticeable Nas Life's a Bitch interpolation. That's a key aspect of the song. A bit more of a reflective track lyrically overall with this like wisdom sharing chorus from H. Loud, I enjoyed the beat progression with this one. You have this like female like chant loop to its core, which I think is a pretty nice hook, the way it grabs you. Locked In, definitely a switch up, more of like a slower R&B. You get a lot of that Tamara feature. And, H, again, he's demonstrated an interest in making this type of track as well. Think, of course, the Ashanti flip he did, Baby, which ended up being a big hit from him off the last album. And this, of course, is also similar to the song Love featuring Anne Marie, same type of track. Pop It Off featuring Kenzo Straight Drop, definitely a drill-esque beat. I say drill-esque because I don't know if it's like completely drill, but like the gloominess certainly leans that way. And Kenzo, just a very aggressive flow. Again, a very nice contrast with H. B4E Please. How are you supposed to say that? B4E is clearly something else. Bay Please? I don't know. I thought that one, really nice beat overall. Business, again, another nice back and forth between H and the feature Avellino. I think that drum loop really grabs you. Straight Rhymes too, this is H being his like rapidy rap self, fitting in a ton of bars, and of course, a sequence track at this point, the second song in the series. And I think these songs, both of the Straight Rhymes for that matter, they're fine. It's not necessarily my cup of tea to just listen to the lyrical gymnastics type thing. It's fine. No, it's pretty good. And Room 44, kind of same thing. Again, like this is an H album where it's like, I don't know if anything like super grabbed me, apart from the song with AJ, but also nothing really turned me off either. Like it's a really solid bass line like H music. And he's a fun artist. People like him. And it makes sense. Let me know though, what'd you think of H's third album 4? Let me know. And for more music reviews, more rap reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, Mac Nostalgia? Dave here, the review of Elio, the latest animated Pixar film. This one from a trio of directors, co-directors, Domi Shi, who directed Turning Red, Adrian Molina, who co-directed Coco, and Madeline Sherifin, who is a Pixar veteran as well. And yeah, Elio has been kind of had a long journey to the screen, delayed over a year out of 2024, but is still notable for being an original Pixar film. And as we know, Pixar and Disney at large has been very sequel dependent. I think Pixar creatively has come under a bit of fire for just not seemingly having the inspiration and the new things to say to the same degree that they used to. I mean, if you think about that, the last original Pixar movie to make a big impact, I mean, you have the pandemic films that were all sidelined and released on Disney Plus and just didn't seem to make the impact that they should have, right? Films like Soul and Luca and Turning Red. And I think Turning Red in a different world probably could have been a much bigger movie. But as a result, we kind of seem to have crept downward with Pixar, right? Remember, of course, a few years ago, Elemental opening small and then actually legging out to pretty solid box office due to a very big international performance, right? Elemental seemed to have been bearing the brunt of a lot of that Pixar I don't want to say disinterest, but perhaps audience, programming, in the sense that Disney Plus is the eventual home of all these kids animated movies. Less people are going out to see them in the moment. And of course, you say all that, but then we look at what happened with Inside Out 2 last year, the biggest movie of 2024, the highest grossing animated movie of all time. And you understand why there's sequel pillage, because when they have hits, they often get bigger and bigger, right? Moana 2, another example. So all that's to say, remains to be seen how well new original stuff can work from Disney these days, right? Of course, look how big Lilo and Stitch has done lately, right? As a remake. Elio, though, unfortunately, seems to be bearing the brunt of a lot of the Pixar criticism of late. It's a fine, solid movie. Doesn't have as much under the hood to interest the adults the way great Pixar movies often do. This is really more of a kid's film through and through. A kid who wants to be abducted by aliens and then ends up getting abducted by aliens is a funny enough premise, and I think the movie overall works pretty well. The movie has some good humor in its middle act, and I think it finds itself in its storytelling after a pretty slow start, but it's nothing that you haven't seen before from Pixar. That, unfortunately, I think will be the problem with it for many. And I think the premise, too, of you have Elio, right? This kid who struggles to make friends. He's a bit quirky and unique in terms of just how he acts, what he's interested in. Of course, he lives with his aunt. His parents are gone. And, his self-esteem, but also what he thinks about himself is, of course, unsurprisingly, still a work in progress as an 11-year-old, and him getting, taken by aliens who mistake him for the ambassador of Earth after it's been something he was aspiring to be and achieve. It's all pretty cool. And then when you get to, the aliens up in space, the Communiverse, as it's called, big Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantum Mania energy in terms of the visuals. Unfortunately, the movie really rushes us forward with the villain plot, and I would have loved just more time with those aliens and with their magic, computer and all that shit. It just felt so rushed, and it just felt like a missed opportunity. There was more stuff there. I think the villain, Lord Grigon, pretty solid ultimately, because he's multi-layered and there's more depth to him, but he'll certainly remind you of Emperor Zurg from Toy Story. I think that's pretty clear. I think his son, Glordon, though, is by far the most effective part of the movie in terms of the supporting cast. Glordon is just really funny, and his energy, the chemistry you could call it with Elio, I think works pretty well. I enjoyed an extended scene about navigating a debris field, right? Kind of reminiscent of Star Wars and having to plot the route to hyperspace versus just jumping right away, as Han Solo's speech in A New Hope reminds us. So that was cool. There's some fun clone comedy when Elio gets a clone to keep up appearances while he's actually the real Elio's up in space. I think that was pretty good. And Zoe Saldana plays the aunt, Olga, and she I think it's a pretty spirited vocal performance for what she's given. And yeah, I think the movie's all right. It's I think I probably prefer Luca more than this, just because I thought that was a bit more visually interesting and had just a bit more to it. But yeah, I think this one, it's all right. And if we think about the future of Pixar at this point, we do have another original film, Hoppers, coming out in March. But then we will be getting Toy Story 5 in June, another sequel. And then 2027, there's an original film, Gato, on the calendar. But then 2028, we have Incredibles 3 dated. And 2029, we have Coco 2. So that's 3 mega sequels, 2 originals. And, in theory, it's keeping a more of an even split. We just want to see success, I think, for the originals, right? And we just have, apart from Elemental belatedly getting there, it's been a bit of a longer time, really since Coco, when you could say there was a really successful original Pixar film. So hopefully we can get back there, because Pixar for a long time was a really exciting creative place that we were really invested in. And maybe Illumination has stolen some of that lunch recently as they've come to be a massive force under Universal. The Disney front, of course, at the end of the year, they have Zootopia 2 coming out, which I expect to be massive as well. So that's just kind of where we are. But if you think between the success of Inside Out 2, the success of the Lilo and Stitch remake, the upcoming success of Zootopia 2 and Toy Story 5, it's hard not to expect more of the IP leaning stuff from Disney. That's just how they're moving, and also what the data is telling them to make. So I really hope that maybe Hoppers can be more successful than Elio has been. Maybe coming out in March will be helpful. I think Elio coming out so close to the release of Lilo and Stitch wasn't helpful to its success. But yeah, let me know what you think of Elio. What do you think about Pixar in general these days? Let me know. And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. What's up, Mike Nostalgia Dave here with a review of 28 Years Later, the new post-apocalyptic horror film from Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, starring Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jodie Comer, Ralph Fiennes, and Alfie Williams. Of course, this is the return at last of the 28 film franchise, following, of course, Boyle's 28 Days Later in 2002, and the follow-up film 28 Weeks Later in 2007. And this is honestly really exciting because, of course, it's Boyle's first movie since Yesterday came out back in 2019. But really, it's great because, it's Boyle's return to this franchise 28 Weeks Later, not nearly as compelling as the original. And this has always been a franchise, particularly the first one and this new film, that has so much ideas and things to present within the zombie storytelling mold. And that's why it's just, been really impressive. If you think about 28 Days Later, and when that came out back in 2002, of course, I think the filmmaking style, really stands out with its intentionally lo-fi presentation, something that was really effective in the theater experience, but when you watch it at home, almost doesn't communicate nearly the same way, almost coming across as just 480p. Not the best, right? Nowadays, though, now again, with 28 years later, Boyle made the decision to shoot this film on iPhone. I think it was iPhone Pro 15, or 15 Pro, I believe. And, that's happened a few times recently, right? Sean Baker's Tangerine, a few Steven Soderbergh films like High Flying Bird. But to do it with a movie this big and this outside and expansive, communicating action, is really impressive, but also compelling and bold undertaking. 28 Years Later is an awesome return for this franchise after nearly 2 decades of being away. Danny Boyle once again back with his unique filmmaking style, Alex Garland in the writing bag, and once again we have another zombie story that's so humanistic and deep and reflective on, greater themes than your average horror post-apocalyptic story goes. The emotional beats certainly pay off at the end, as does the coming-of-age story at the film's core. At the end of the day, it's the intelligence of these films that really compel you, and I can't wait to see the next one just because I have such faith in this creative team. If you think about 28 Years Later, right, like the original trailer, for the first trailer for this film, got so much attention and goodwill right away, but we weren't really aware of the dynamics of what this story was going to be. I think a lot of people expected this to be like, Aaron Taylor Johnson, kicking ass, killing zombies, right, and taking his son out with him, right, like almost like a lone wolf and cub, Last of Us type story, right? But no, it doesn't end up being that. Aaron Taylor Johnson is only in this movie in the beginning. I think he does well in the film. His character has a lot to him in a short amount of time, which is great, but it really ends up being a straightforward, in a sense, coming-of-age story about the son Spike, played by Alfie Williams. Alfie Williams is, in fact, the star of this movie. Jodie Comer, Spike's mom, is someone battling some kind of illness, mental illness, physical illness of some kind. And of course, because we're in a apocalyptic zombie world, 28 years later at that, we don't exactly have modern medicine to help people on this quarantined world that is the United Kingdom. The emotional journey that you go on with Spike and his mom is, I think quite impressive, and kind of multi-layered, as Spike learns things about the world and learns things about life that I think we can relate to as people in reality, but he's learning it within the prism of the obviously very dark and difficult world he lives in. The movie also gives you, I think, a really fun subversion to Ralph Fiennes' character, who has an amazing, third act role to play in this film. Obviously, the imagery of him coated in iodine, as he puts it, but you think, he comes across as very, very scary looking, but he's not a villain in the movie. He's actually someone who can offer a bit of knowledge and helpfulness, but more than anything has a more spiritual purpose to his desire to keep staying in the land of the living. The movie also has, I think, really sophisticated way of giving you bits of world building and exposition to really ground the story once again, where we learn that the rage virus has been contained to England, and it has been removed from the rest of Europe, which of course was the suggestion at the end of the second film that the rage virus had been unleashed on the rest of Europe. So they kind of retcon that, or just, move that forward to the sense that now this is where it's happening, and there's these quarantine patrol boats that we end up meeting a soldier from Sweden at that. So I think the stakes have been established, and the community that Spike and his parents live in is this, causeway-connected island off the mainland, and you get a little life into this type of community, and also a peek into their kind of like societal dynamics and rituals. As Jamie, the dad, brings Spike to the mainland to get his first kills, and they have a big rip-roaring celebration when they return, right? I think that first journey into the mainland, the meat of the Aaron Taylor Johnson role, I think that's very scary and well done. I really like that. And then, when things break off and you realize what kind of movie it's going to be, and Aaron Taylor Johnson's not going to be in the story too much later, I wasn't apprehensive, but I was curious, like how it's going to go about. But because it ended up being focused more so on Spike's, kind of emotional maturity and growth, I think it ended up really working. I think Jodie Comer does a solid job. I don't think it's the best character in a sense. She's kind of sidelined with her condition most of the time, which involves a bit of like a split personality, or at least losing memory in some regard. But overall, I think the emotional beats really hit by the end, and the movie ends in a bit of a cliffhanger, which is an allusion to the kind of opening scene, and tying us into the sequel, which is already in production. Now it's 28 years later, The Bone Temple, which will be directed by Nia DaCosta, once again written by Alex Garland. We do know that Cillian Murphy, of course the star of the original film, was spotted on set regarding that sequel, which actually I believe has already finished filming. I believe it was shot more or less back to back in a certain sense with 28 years later. So that's very exciting, this new trilogy, and it's looking like the movie will be successful enough at the box office from the early returns that we should be able to have confidence in seeing the rest of this trilogy. So I'm very much looking forward to that. I think if you think about like the top level things, right, like 28 Days Later was very much celebrated for being like a allegory about 9/11, and then 28 Weeks Later, warts and all, more about like the Iraq War. And now 28 years later, pretty clearly about Brexit. So what will the Bone Temple be about? I do not know. COVID, perhaps? I don't know. We'll find out. But yeah, I think the movie's really good. I think it has the zombie, action that you want. The big alphas, really letting it all hang and all as in their naked selves. I think is both amusing, but you see some gnarly action, very bloody, probably the goriest of all of these movies, if that was possible, but I think so. There's also a lot of, I think, just kind of visual flair and interstitial scenes and vision type stuff, and the movie I think really looks good, and I think it's worthy of multiple viewings. Honestly, once you have more grasp on the plot, you can kind of sit with some of those other feats of filmmaking, so to speak. But yeah, I really like the movie. Let me know though, what'd you think of 28 Years Later? What'd you like most about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe. I'll see you next time. What's up, Womack Nostalgia? Dave here with a review of F1, being marketed as F1 the Movie, the new sports drama film from Joseph Kosinski, starring Brad Pitt, Damson Idris, Kerry Condon, and Javier Bardem. This film is Kosinski's true follow-up to his massive hit Top Gun Maverick from a few years ago. And this is also the latest blockbuster effort from Apple Studios with a full theatrical release from Warner Brothers. I'm going to talk about this movie in terms of just how it works as a film and for film fans, and also what it means and how it goes for Formula One fans, of which I am both. Now, of course, there's been a lot of hype for this movie because obviously it was Kosinski's follow-up to Maverick in terms of what he was able to communicate with that movie, both in terms of emotional payoff and just pure action filmmaking. Very exciting. Of course, Brad Pitt in a starring role. Very exciting. But also because this was a Formula One movie with the full participation of Formula One, of course, the racing series in real life. And as a result, this film was extensively shot during the Formula One season, both the 2023 season and also the 2024 season, because of course filming got delayed due to the writer's strike in 23. So if you're a fan of Formula One, a big one or a small one for that matter, you will recognize things about this movie, namely various drivers, including the most famous of them all, are in this movie, not really in speaking roles, but they're there as participants within, of course, this fictional story being told in the Formula One World Championship. I think that's really cool grounding. And of course, when you combine that with shooting on track at some of the most iconic tracks that Formula One races at, such as Spa, Monza, and Silverstone, they also go to Abu Dhabi as well. It just really brings an authenticity. Of course, this film was shot the car they used was actually like a modified Formula 2 car. So this was a real, like, true single-seater racing car used to make this movie. So I think all of that going in just brought a lot of attention and interest for the movie, I think, kind of from all corners. And if you think about, like, racing movies, I think racing movies have often been really great. Honestly, you think about, recently there hasn't been a ton of them. Of course, they're generally expensive to make, but there has been some notable ones. Of course, Michael Mann's Ferrari most recently, Ron Howard's Rush, James Mangold's Ford versus Ferrari, of course, the classics Grand Prix and Le Mans from the late 60s, early 70s time, and having one, shot today with all the action chops of someone like Kosinski. Really great opportunity. F1 the movie is a rip-roaring time. This film goes. If you're a fan of action films and drama, you will like the movie. But also, if you're a Formula One fan, you will appreciate the authenticity this movie is bringing to the table. Are we seeing outlandish things portrayed on the track? Yes. Is everything broadly plausible? Also, yes, but of course, there's some leaps that we're going through. We cut some corners in terms of communicating the story for the movie's purposes. We're not watching a race, we're watching a racing movie, so you kind of have to go with that going in. Chief among them, of course, is that Brad Pitt plays Sonny Hayes, a driver returning to Formula One 30 years after he last raced, a contemporary of Senna and Prost in the 90s. We know that that's not something that's realistic, but for the sake of the movie, it really works. Pitt's charms are on full display in the role of Sonny Hayes, and Damson Idris also does a great job as his young teammate Joshua Pierce. And if you think about the whole team that they're a part of course, Apex GP, a fictional Formula One team, Javier Bardem playing the owner of the team, someone who's working through financing of the team and kind of throwing a Hail Mary by even bringing back his old friend and old racing buddy, Sonny. And, I think he kind of gives me kind of Lawrence Stroll vibes in terms of his energy, although he doesn't seem to have nearly as much wealth as Lawrence Stroll does in real life. So I'm not sure if there's a clean comp to who he is, but I really enjoy Bardem, again, someone else who has a lot of charisma, really nice in this role here. Carrie Condon also plays the technical director of Apex GP, and she's someone who I think also really fits in this well, has great chemistry with Brad Pitt. I really liked her character as well. Some of the other members of the team, like the head mechanic, one of the the wheel gun mechs, like those, the social media admin. Most of those characters don't really have too much more to do. Sonny and Josh's race engineers, even the team principal, Casper, who's played by Kim Bonilla of Killing Eve fame. Even he doesn't have a whole lot going on. Same for Tobias Menzies, who's a financier and backer of Cervantes, Bardem's owner character. So for the most part, I think any kind of character growth is largely relegated to the main characters, the core group there. And even still, I think if you want to compare this to Top Gun Maverick, it doesn't have nearly as much like emotional progression as that movie does. And of course, that movie, of course, being a sequel that benefits from nostalgia and so much passage of time since the original film came out, it's kind of operating in a different ball game than a movie like F1 is. So like, Brad Pitt's Sonny Hayes character, I think right away, like, you like him and his charms, but there's not like a ton of growth in his character necessarily. Like, there's broadly like formulaic beats to the progression of the plot and what happens and how the characters come together and if they find success or not in the end. Like, a lot of those beats you can like feel them out ahead of time. But I just think the movie's really entertaining. I think right away, I saw it in the early screening, and there was some F1 fans in the room. Clearly, there was kind of people like clapping and like chuckling to themselves, seeing what was being portrayed in this film in terms of Sonny being in a backmarker car, but having these wily tactics that are skirting the rules, threatening with penalties to try and manufacture a way to get points with a bit of luck and circumstance and going against the grain with atypical strategies and stuff. Again, like, if you're a fan of Formula One, you'll probably see a lot of that coming together and see convenience and see like, oh, maybe that even is a potential thought, but would that even have actually worked? Like, you kind of have to put all that to the side because it's plausible enough and the action is communicated in certainly an authentic way. You just kind of have to go with it. And I think it was pretty funny, like, watching Sonny be a Kevin Magnussen type brick wall and, intentionally do damage and they kind of yada yada penalties while nodding to them. We never see a qualifying session, which I think makes perfect sense for the sake of the film, But I think that was pretty fun. Like, you even have like a media availability session where you have Brad Pitt there in the bullpen that we know from every race weekend, and you have Fernando Alonso himself go up and say, "Nice job to Sonny," acknowledging the tactics, which is like such a Alonso thing. So like, I just love like those little details there. Similarly, you have Sonny holding up Verstappen for a little bit, and Max giving him the finger as he finally gets on by. Again, something that feels very real. I loved at the very end, just from the racing at Abu Dhabi, that Lewis is presented as the final driver that needs to be passed. Obviously, this is like 23, 24 time. He's still at Mercedes, the way this film was shot. Lewis is the producer on the movie, so I don't begrudge him for inserting himself into that. Of course, he doesn't speak any words in the movie; he's just kind of there. I think that was cool. Josh Pearce character, Damson Idris, probably best known from FX's Snowfall, but I think he's good in this role because he communicates something really real, which is like the desperation of being a driver in a backmarker team and the fleeting nature of your career in the championship when you have limited opportunity to prove yourself. And his precociousness, his headstrongness, and how he clashes with Sonny and that teammate dynamic, which of course is so real in real life racing as well, and how they finally come together and unite and work together to finally get through and find success despite all of the chips stacked against them and their small team at the back of the grid. Again, I think that all is quite enjoyable. If we think about the action itself, I mean, there was various angles that are communicated within the car. I think we spent a lot of time, on close-up of the drivers' faces, which makes perfect sense in terms of trying to communicate some kind of emotion while in the car. But I think the speed, the thrill of the energy of the racing looks real. Like, as an F1 fan, like, it felt good, it looked good, and because the movie is ratcheting up the drama because it's a film, you're really like on the edge of your seat watching these races. And what I actually thought was pretty amusing is watching some of these is they intersperse some real life F1 racing stuff that happens. Like, I think very vividly in this movie, they go to the Mexico Grand Prix, and this was at 2023 when Sergio Perez went off and crashed at turn 1 of lap 1. And they actually show that in the movie, and they show like Sonny and Josh getting through the traffic and moving up as a result. But that was actually grounded in like real life thing that happened at that race 2 years ago. I thought that was pretty cool. I did recognize a few moments like that. Also a bit of a time capsule in addition to Lewis being at Mercedes, Perez still being in the championship. You have Will Buxton as one of the big media talking heads in the film. He has a few scenes. Of course, Will Buxton has since moved on to IndyCar, but I enjoyed seeing him. Of course, he's a familiar face to Formula One Drive to Survive fans, of course, on Netflix. I think there's one thing that might irk like the actual racing fan You have the commentary from the Sky Sports commentators in real life, David Croft and Martin Brundle. And the commentary that they're giving in the movie is unsurprisingly a lot more expository and just explanatory than they would normally do during a race. And they did explain things during the time for races. Of course, the audience always has new people coming in, but they're really like highlighting what things mean in terms of like safety cars and tires and stuff, just to make sure the layman who's watching the movie understands. Again, I think that's something you have to just be okay with, even if it's a bit unrealistic in terms of how you would really go through the race. Ultimately, I think this is a film that's really about the spectacle first. So like, you wouldn't necessarily clamor for a sequel for this movie. You could certainly make one, but given the very high cost of making this in terms of all the on location shooting around the world at various tracks, like unsurprisingly, it was a big undertaking, and I'm just so happy that it really came together post-strike as well as it has. And I really hope this film does well, because this is really like a big test for Apple's future movie output. They, of course, will continue to make movies. It's really just a question of whether they get theatrically released. Of course, Killers of the Flower Moon was an expensive movie that didn't make as much as they wanted. Fly Me to the Moon didn't do too well. And then, of course, last fall, they infamously pulled Wolfs, the John Watts, George Clooney, Brad Pitt film, from a theatrical release and released it just on the service. Earlier this year, they released a Guy Ritchie film straight to the service. Guy Ritchie, someone with a pretty strong track record at the box office at that. So I really hope F1 works, because I want Apple and their deep pockets to continue to make big movies like this. So we really want, and this is a film that needs to be seen on the big screen, given, Kosinski's chops in terms of filmmaking and action credibility. So I really hope the film does well. I think we can expect a good international audience to this, given how global F1 is as a sport. So I really hope the marketing, works in that regard. There's been the F1 the movie soundtrack that's been released in the lead up to this. You do hear some of those songs during the run of this movie. There was one moment that I was able to predict. I thought that was pretty obvious. That would of course be Rosé's "Messy" off that soundtrack. Unsurprisingly, they blast that chorus as soon as you see the scene of Sonny and Carrie Condon's character making out, as seen in the trailer. Like, that was the easiest layup. You knew they would score it that way, but I think it really works. And the actual score is from Hans Zimmer, and Hans, unsurprisingly, makes an impact as well. So yeah, I really liked F1. I liked it as a racing movie. I liked it as a big fan of Formula One, someone who watches every race, who watches every qualifying every week. I think it satisfies both parties. I think if you're being an overly nitpicky kind of viewer as an F1 fan, you're kind of missing the point of watching something like this. You're not watching a race, you're watching a racing movie. You don't want to watch something that's a facsimile of an actual race weekend most of the time. This is the better way to do it. So I think people that might be defensive and feel like they don't want something like this to exist, I think those people need to have a bit more of an open mind, or at least understand why maybe it's just not for them. To me, though, I think it's a great success, and I'm really hoping it does well. Let me know, though, what did you think of F1, the movie? What did you like most about it? And for more movie reviews, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. All right, that's going to do for the pod this week. Next week, another really big one. Going to catch up on Marvel's Ironheart from this week, and then two massive shows coming out for us. The Bear Season 4 on FX and Hulu, and Squid Game's third and final season on Netflix. Also, the conclusion of the first season of Lazarus on Max and Adult Swim, and then new music from Cat's Eye and Lorde. Big pre-4th of July week for the pod, so make sure you subscribe. youtube.com/nostalgiapod, linktree.com/nostalgiapod. See the links below. Get the best of 2025 Spotify playlist also linked below. Let me know what's good, and I'll see you next week.